price to pay. A boy is born in a faraway country at the dawn of a new century. At age 12, after arguing with his father, he runs away, jumps a cargo ship and arrives in the Western Hemisphere. He starts a family, opens a store and then launches a supermarket. He expands into growing the food he sells. The country where he arrived is Mexico. Today, the family business is one of the leading growers of tomatoes in its region. If a wall is built on the US-Mexico border, and Mexico is supposed to pay for it, one way to extract that payment would be through a U.S. tax on Mexican imports. But in the end, Mexico would not be the one bearing the cost. Tomatoes as big and round as Christmas ornaments hang from rows of vines that fill a huge greenhouse. Juan Ley Jr. reaches up and cuts off a ripe tomato with his pocket knife, slices off a piece and pops it in his mouth. He hands a slice to his father, Juan Jose Ley, who does the same. Support journalism to support groundbreaking journalism like The Wall. Find one of the more than 100 USA Today Network newsrooms closest to you and subscribe today. Get started. It's good, huh? Juan Jr. says. It's the taste of success. Over 4 generations, the Ley family has built one of the biggest tomato operations in Mexico, part of a business empire that includes the country's largest privately held supermarket chain. The family grows some 1,500 acres of vegetables, mostly tomatoes, in open fields and greenhouses in the coastal state of Sinaloa, the tomato capital of Mexico, and another 100 acres in Jalisco. But most of the tomatoes the Leys harvest are not sold in the family's supermarkets. Nor are they tasted in Mexico, where the tomato remains an essential ingredient in the salsas that flavor Mexican cuisine hundreds of years after the tomato was first domesticated by the Inca in South America and later by the Aztecs. Almost all of their tomatoes are destined for the U.S. winter market, ending up in supermarkets, restaurants and processing plants as far away as Boston and Seattle. So when President Donald Trump's administration floated the idea of a 20% tax on Mexican imports as a way of making Mexico pay for a border wall, the Leys paid attention. Building a great wall on the southern border and making Mexico pay for it was a cornerstone of candidate Trump's campaign. It anchored his populist message and helped him get elected. As recently as July, during a face-to-face meeting with Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto, Trump continued to insist that Mexico absolutely will pay for the wall, even though Peña Nieto has said repeatedly that his country will not. And here is where the tomato comes in. Mexico is by far the leading supplier of fresh vegetables to the U.S. Nearly 11.6 billion pounds of vegetables valued at $5.6 billion came from Mexico in 2016. According to U.S. Department of Agriculture Economic Research Service data. On top of the heap is the tomato. Nearly half of all tomatoes sold in the U.S. come from Mexico, according to an analysis of the agency's ERS data. In winter, when cold weather makes it difficult to commercially grow tomatoes in most U.S. states except Florida, 70% of tomatoes come from Mexico, according to the Fresh Produce Association of the Americas. If you've eaten a tomato in winter, chances are it came from Mexico, and it may have even been grown by the Ley family. 100% of these are going to a retailer, Juan Jose Ley says, standing amid rows of tomatoes ripening on vines. These are going to be used in homes across the United States. So how, then, would a tax on Mexican imports affect the Ley's tomato business? It will depend on how big a tax it is, Ley says. Planning for winter tomatoes, Del Campo executives and Ley family members Diego Sr., from left, Juan Jose and Diego Jr. address the company's needs for the next winter's growing season during a meeting at Del Campo Supreme, their distribution operation in Nogales, Arizona. Nicosa USA Today Network. Any tax on Mexican imports would likely be passed on to U.S. consumers, he says. As a result, Mexico wouldn't pay for the border wall. Americans would. As a businessman, Ley is careful not to take a political stance on Trump or his wall. But he admits he's worried about an import tax. A large import tax could drive up the price of Mexican tomatoes at supermarkets in the U.S. and that might cause people to buy fewer. Lower consumption would mean lower profits. So a tax on Mexican imports could hurt his business, even if the cost is passed on to consumers. In July, the White House and the Republican leadership in Congress abandoned a push to create a so-called border adjustment tax as part of tax reform efforts. A border adjustment tax would have hiked prices on imported goods from all countries, not just Mexico. But it was strongly opposed by U.S. retailers concerned it would drive up prices on clothing, cars, electronics and other goods. A tax on